In part 2, Pastor Sam Hinn talked about those who have stood by him. In part 3, he opens up about the validation of numbers he experienced at a pivotal point in time, walking through the depression and talking through the rough places with wife Erika. And last but not least, a safe place called Arms Lifted.
Where we had great years because my ministry was her and the kids. Where it shifted was when success came in. And now it wasn't about ministering to my wife and kids. It was now, we've got this machine and we've got this system and I've got a staff and we're growing and a lot of popular ministries are coming through. And honestly, all of it just shifted from my wife and my kids validating me to the ministry validating me.
Which brings a point, you mentioned a validation of numbers to me in our phone conversation. What begins to happen subtly with that?
Well, I think the danger is to start believing your own hype and to start believing your own press. You know, people telling you you're the best and you know you're the greatest pastor and I, as far as my heart today for people is probably even greater than it's ever been. It's just different in I see them differently than I ever did before. So I think validation for any pastor, for any leader, you know, one of the things that I guess was said about me was I'm a narcissist. And I think there's a part of that is probably true. But I think any pastor has to deal with some narcissism. You're on a platform. You're up in front of people. You're wanting those people to enjoy. So I think we all have, whether it's narcissism or to do our best, or I think the danger is when you start living for the validation of people before you live for your, and you shouldn't anyways, because a lot of the people that are with you today are probably going to be with you 2 years from now, 3 years from now. And that's one of the things that I learned. A great lesson for me was, there's a time and a season in your life where you think, I can't do without these people. I can't live, I can't do life, I can't do ministry. And then you come to learn, well, those people have moved on and you're still there. But a new set of people come in. That's okay. The danger is when you start looking to be validated by those people. And depending on what stream of ministry you grew up in, for my stream, validation of numbers was big. Because how's the crowd? And then we end up playing for the crowd, and I don't mean playing like in a bad way, but you end up, you know, will I preach as passionately for 5 as I would preach for 5,000? And if the honest answer, and you have to be honest, you've got to be, honesty demands you. If it doesn't start there, forget it. I had to get to that place of ever thinking about ministry again. I'll do it for the audience of 1. I do it for the validation of 1, actually 2, him and my wife. So I don't need the people's validation. I don't need that constant, because I saw what it did. And the truth is, I think if you asked most leaders, they would probably struggle. And that's why we get so concerned. Well, our church was 150, but now we're down to 20. And somehow that impacts almost our self-worth, as if we did something wrong. I think sometimes you just have to take that pressure off and realize it's not about the numbers. It's about what you do with what He's called you to do and what He's given you. And if it ministers to 1, that should be enough. And I think I could give you all the religious terminology and, oh, well, praise the Lord, you know, I do it for the audience of 1. But the truth is, okay, so if there was actually 1 there, would you feel deflated? And if you live for that, I want nothing to do with that. So I've never been happier and I've never been freer.
Like an onion, peeling the layers.
I think we're as complex as onions, which are pretty simple, but there's so many layers to peel back in an onion's life, and I don't think we're any different. I think there's a lot of layers of shame, layers of anger, layers of lust, layers of uncleanness, and you just go down the list, because we're frail, we're broken. The idea for me is for anyone to go through even remotely close to what we went through, and to think that you're going to bounce back up on your feet in 3 months, you're smoking something. It takes, Erika and I went to counseling for a full year, every single week, with a therapist. Prior to that, I would have almost frowned on that. I don't need counseling. Look at me. I was so glad that I was so broken of that, because it was the greatest thing that we've ever encountered together. It was through that counseling, just so it's totally accurate, 7 months we went every single week with a therapist that we did not know, who was a licensed, he's got his master's degree.
Who was that, Pastor Sam?
Andy Blanchard, Discovery Counseling, phenomenal. And it was so painful, but it was in every one of those sessions where layers were being peeled back. Layers for me, I'd never dealt with. I didn't even know I had issues with rejection. Never knew I had issues with insecurity, validation. But it's a vicious cycle. Pride comes before a fall. So for every leader that's fallen, look at pride. Pride's going to bring you down. And so for me, I wasn't that kind of guy that walked out and arrogant and, you serve me. My heart was always the opposite. I'm here to serve you. But insecurity was my weakness. And insecurity is really no different than pride. But I never knew I had that until we sat down with the counselor, with my wife, and daily just peeled the layers. And the Lord just showing me things like in dreams. Like the first year, I don't know how much we slept. But just being able to peel back all these things of rejection and, so again, pride, and then, the pride was, behind that pride was my insecurity. Behind that insecurity was my rejection, feeling that my life needed to be validated by people. I can't say on air what my wife actually called me, because when I asked her, have I really been that prideful? And she said, well, no, you've actually been, and it hit me, and oh my gosh, I've actually been that. But when you're in it, you don't see it. And I love my staff. I absolutely love my staff. And I believe they love me. But none of them ever approached me with that. You're being a little bit arrogant. Ministry has a tendency to do that. You start really believing that you're not better than anyone else, but that it's owed to you, whether it's your title, your office, your position. So for me, the pride was driven by my insecurity. That's, I think, why a lot of pastors, again, my opinion, I think that's why a lot of pastors control the service. Insecurity. And so we want Jesus to come. It's like, okay, well, what if he wants to come, and then he's going to tell you to sit down? Would we as leaders really be willing just to walk off the stage and sit down and let the Lord do his work?
Wow.
But because we're programmed, this is what it's going to take. If I don't go up there and receive the offering, we're going to take a hit. If I'm not involved, the people aren't going to stay connected. That, if we're not careful, it it starts putting in us this false, idea that it all revolves around us. And for me, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, I think that's what began to happen. And the focus became that. So for me, the insecurity, the pride, okay, after everything happened, or before everything happened, I didn't want this to happen because I was so afraid of the outcome. I wanted to protect. That's pride. It's not my work to protect. I didn't call myself, he called me. He chose me, I didn't choose me, he did. But how do we go from him calling us, him choosing us, him anointing us, and now I'm anointed? No, it's not yours, it's his. He gave it to you. So how do you take ownership of something that was never yours?
In our conversation, you and I discussed from Erika's standpoint. Well, let me quote another Facebook post. It's important to talk about everything, no matter how much it hurts, because then we are talking our way through it. One of the greatest things that happened in our relationship is we now talk about everything, even if it really hurts. Tell me about that.
It was the most liberating, most painful, but the most liberating, because it's sort of, the one thing that immediately in any leader that's fallen, the key is going to be honesty and openness, and you have to have that. No marriage can last. So we began to talk about everything, and from the time that I repented and was asked the question, will you be honest? And absolutely, because I cared about my marriage. I cared about my wife and my kids. So, I remember, confessing to her in a pastor's office, then went in and met with my kids and repented to them. And because as long as communication is the foundation of trust. So for us to trust each other, we have to be able to communicate whatever it is that we're going through. You can't just rebuild trust on thoughts and intentions. It's communication. And so this is sort of a bit of a longer version of this, but what changed our lives was sitting with our counselor, and he asked me about the restoration process, and this literally changed my entire world. And he said, tell me about your restoration process. So I did. I told him, what had begun, and he said, well, Sam, I the whole process, first year, 2 years, and all of that. And he said, my opinion is that trust is not earned. He said, trust is a gift. And he said, I'm not saying that you don't rebuild trust and that you don't earn it. I'm saying to you that trust is like grace, and that it's a gift, and people are either going to give it to you or withhold it. And he said, this is for you. He said, this is for you. This isn't about them. This is about you. And he said, for you, what I want you to realize is that you can jump through all of the hoops and become trustworthy again in your own understanding. Now that you've done everything, you think, okay, well, I'm trustworthy. But in the end, I want you to realize that even if you think you're trustworthy, people are still going to look at you and say, we love you, but we don't trust you. So he said, it's not earned, it's a gift. What hit me then was, why am I going to spend the rest of my life jumping through hoops for people who have already chosen not to give me trust as a gift? That changed my life. I remember that night, I cried. When he said that, I cried. And it comes back to this conversation, to your question. That night we went out to dinner with John and Mary Murphy. And I was sharing this story, and I just started weeping, telling it again, because it's almost like I've never heard anything so powerful. Trust is a gift. And so I understand people, because of whatever happened, they don't trust. I get that, and I understand that, so I'm not mad at them. And I'm glad they don't have to waste time trying to trust me again. But I'm not going to live my life trying to validate myself to people who've already chosen, I'll never trust you. So that night we went to dinner, and I shared this story with John and Mary. And Mary said, Pastor, I still get, every time I say this, I choke up. She said, Pastor, I give you my trust as a gift. And I broke down. Because I've encountered the presence of God. I've felt the weight of his presence in different settings. I'd never felt the weight of trust until that day. And I said to her, I said, Mary, if I betray this trust, may the Lord take me home. Because we don't talk about trust. We don't talk about trust in a relationship. It's either it's a given or it's never talked about until it's betrayed. When Erika gave me her trust as a gift, that was the great, and that's when I knew everything's going to be okay. And so we were literally able to talk about the most painful everything, because we had we gave each other that gift. And I remembered saying to our counselor, I said, I've heard her enough. I don't want to talk about things that I know are going to hurt her more. And that's painful to me because I'm still dealing with the shame. And he said to me, he said, Sam, if you think not talking about it is protecting the marriage, it's actually going to drive a wedge between you both. And that's where you get that quote. And he said, because if you talk about it, you're able to process it together. I want people to know. I don't care what's happened. I don't care how painful. I don't care. Listen, it's not like we try to measure this sin. No, it all hurts. It's all so painful. The danger is when you start just to clam up and you allow shame and guilt to just isolate you and not talk. And so Erika and I communicated day and night. And people like, well, how, they didn't believe our progress. That's because we spent literally every single day together, reading, talking, reading books together, going through chapters together, talking, everything. We talked about, there is nothing that she doesn't know about my life. So now on the other end, we're so free.
Is that what you just went through, is that what's meant by attending, validating, and securing?
Yeah, the two different triangles. Yeah, the heal and the fix. Because as human beings, especially as men, we're driven to fix. You don't fix a relationship. And that yet we try. You don't fix it. You fix a misunderstanding. You heal a relationship.
Powerful.
And so now I help different couples and husbands. You can't fix a relationship, but you can heal it. So here we are trying to advise and trying to teach and counsel in fixing something when all they really need is to feel validated. Attend. Sometimes you don't have to say anything, just be present.
Finding balance, the avalanche of reaction, and a locker room encounter.
Again, this is my story, so I know it will be different for everybody else. The weekend after I confessed everything and went public, I had there was definitely a few people that came up to me and just assured me of their love for me. But I had no idea of the avalanche of talk. It's like, I'm just not that important. But I understand the severity of what took place. And I think now looking back, I think people just, people have to deal with it different ways. There's a group of guys that I play hockey with, played hockey with them for almost 30 years. Not all of them, some of them are new. I think I'm the only one actually from way back that's still, I didn't know how to feel. I mean, the shame of what took place, I think for me, dealing with the shame probably took about a year. Where actually I could lift my head up again. I remember Erika and I would go and we would go eat an hour away because I didn't want to run into anybody. I was so afraid of their reaction. And I was also afraid of my reaction because I was not in a good place. I would have beat the crap out of multiple people. Just because that's the pain. People, it's like, at one point, again, this is me, this is authentic. There was just one point where I was so angry. I did some things and said some things to God that if it wasn't for His mercy and grace, He would have judged me right then and there. But I'm so grateful that He knew that this was just my pain crying out. And so now when I sit with pastors and I hear them and they're cussing and they're just because of something they've went through and lost, and the church would probably sit and judge that. I don't, because this is a layer. This is them dealing through their anger. I know that this is just a layer that one day, very soon, is going to get ripped off. But I remembered walking in that locker room and I'd heard all of the stuff, the articles, and I was so disappointed on top of the pain that I was dealing with. I walked into that locker room Saturday morning not knowing what to expect. And honest to God, I felt more love in that locker room. I felt more of God's love from a group of men that didn't judge me, but accepted me. I didn't know if they'd read the article or articles, but I honestly felt more of God's love in that locker room than I'd experienced in the church. Because I had people in the church hug me and tell me they love me, but then I heard the anger, and that I didn't understand. But now, looking back, everybody dealt with it their own way. So I don't hold that against anybody. That's just the way they dealt with it. But I was so grateful for those guys that just didn't treat me any different. And these are all guys that probably don't attend church, and the church may even frown on. But I tell you what, I would have fought for those guys that day if anybody would have even dared touch them, because they made me feel, they accepted me. With all my flaws, they accepted me.
Moving forward with safeguards in place.
One of the safeguards is I will never, ever put myself through the hell that I've been through. There's no way in hell I would ever do this again. The pain that it's caused. Not just me, but everybody that I've loved. Somebody said to me, again, pardon my honesty, but if it offends, I don't mean to. But somebody once asked me, said, what guarantee? How do we know that you'll never? I could never put myself through that pain again. Was it worth it? Somebody asked me. And my immediate response was, hell no. Because it was so painful. And so the safeguards are, we talked about it a little bit ago, communication begins with the foundation of, or trust begins with the foundation of communication. We communicate about everything. And she's so quick now, so if she sees me going into a dark place, she immediately is on me, like dark place, depression. Depression was huge. Never dealt with depression in my life. Depression became a constant friend, except for Erika pulling me out of it. So we talk about everything. So that's a major safeguard. The leaders that I have around me, the overseers, the constant communication, the amount of love that I've received from, not just my wife and kids, but really a few people that I would never heard. That's what I said when I said to Mary Murphy, I said, if I betray this trust, may the Lord take me home. When you feel the weight of something there's no way I would ever risk that ever happening again. I could never hurt my wife or my kids that way again, or put myself through this and lose everything you've ever built over a fleeting moment. There's no chance.
Pain, anger, and the question, where do fallen pastors and leaders go?
A month after everything happened, I think it was in February of the year when the stuff hit the fan, I had a vision. I had a dream, not a vision, I had a dream. And in the dream, I saw what looked like Aaron and Ur lifting up the arms of Moses. And the name came to me, arms lifted. And now you have to know, where I was mentally, ministry it wasn't even on the radar, forget it. I'll let you edit this if you want, but this is transparency, this is me, this is what happened. When everything happened and I saw the reaction, and again, I didn't understand the reaction because I'm trying to work through my crap and just surviving.
In a painful, angry cry came more grace.
If you're anything like your people, I want nothing to do with you. Even in the midst of that, he knew that, and that's why I love him. I love him more than ever. He could have killed me right there. And you know what? If he would have done it, easy way out than to deal with the rest of the nonsense that came. But I saw his grace. He could have so taken me out, especially after, but he understood my anger. He understood that was just a layer of my pain. My pain was crying out. It wasn't me being vulgar. It was my pain crying out. When I had that vision or that dream, I didn't want to do I woke Erika up. It's like, okay, so I had this dream, almost laughing about it, but I knew that there was a seriousness to it. And that's when I started looking into, where do fallen pastors and leaders go? And that began the process of learning and studying and seeing there's really not a safe place in my circle, in my world, where pastors can be vulnerable and open up. When I started reading the statistics, that blew my mind. How many of them battle with pornography and walking away from the ministry, and it's like all of these anointed vessels today that are out there in the hundreds of thousands, and I'm not talking 100 or in the hundreds of thousands, sure. Pastors who have walked away, whose giftings and callings have never been revoked by God. And so Dwight Bain, my life coach and my friend and he was just a part of our team, he said to me, he said, Sam, it's like Ezekiel in the valley of dry bones. How many leaders are out there the anointing is never lifted? Imagine what could happen if these guys that have had all these years of experience in the ministry could get back up on their feet again and have a safe place to feel like somebody understands them. It's in the hundreds of thousands. So there's this army of fallen warriors that maybe the church has done a really good job of pushing them out, rather than working with them and healing them, because they're powerful vessels. My heart is, in the future, to bring leaders together and to create a safe place. So God gave me the name, was Arms Lifted, and I've actually been doing it already on a private level of talking to leaders whose life has hit a wall. One of them, a very reputable leader, said to me, and his restoration team is made up of 3 of the biggest churches, pastors in the country. And he said to me, he said, Sam, what I told them was they gave me the textbook answers, but what I told them was that Sam helped me walk through it because he's been there, he understands. Because I do. So a textbook answer sometimes isn't enough. A scripture is great. But when you tell somebody, I've been there, I'm going to walk through this season of shame, which is going to probably only get worse right now, and help them understand, I've walked this road with you. I know what you're about to go through. There's a difference. So it'll be a place of confidentiality. It won't be a big group, because I want these leaders to feel safe.
Here is a portion of a Facebook post from Sam Hinn on May 11th, 2015. Quote, I believe that God is bringing a move that will release such a new understanding of the fear of the Lord that the scoffers are stilled, the skeptics are silenced, and the mockers are muffled. The validation of Christianity isn't systems of operation or skilled marketing. The validation of Christianity is still being seen in the fact that God is still changing lives. The cross was the climax of love in manifestation.
But I think people are just longing for authenticity and genuineness. I remembered one time going to an altar call, and I went. And I remember the next day being confronted by somebody in the leadership that said, it's not good for leaders to be seen at the altar because we want to set an example. I said, my response to the leader was, that's where I need it to be. So I think the time has changed, where I think if we can just be honest and transparent and realize that it's not about our story. This is not about Sam Hinn's story back. Not interested. I'm interested in, this is the story of redemption, of what God will do with any one of us who's fallen, who's broken, if we've truly, truly repented. And there's fruit to that repentance, and there's godly sorrow. I want to end well. I don't want to end with the story of the articles or the story of what happened and how bad. And I want it to end with how many people it helped, how many marriages it kept. Because the one thing I heard over and over again was, when this happened to you guys, to you and Erika, we began to evaluate our marriage. Strong marriages that maybe didn't talk about stuff. So my peace comes that I know that when it all ends, when my life ends, I would have invested the best of my life to those that will weep the most. And it may be a very small number, but I'm okay with that, because it'll be my wife and my kids and my family. There's hope. And that God can take ordinary people just like you and me and do extraordinary things through. But you've got to come to that place of just being broken and allowing God to remold your life and maybe give you a new identity, because maybe the identity that you've been living with is really not you. It's what people have put on you, it's what the church has put on you, it's what religion has put on you, it's what others have put on you, but that's just not you. So you've played this game, you've faked it for all these years, only to pay the price that after all these years, those people aren't around anymore, but you're still living in a fake identity. I pray that you'll be able to say like Paul, I claim his grace to be who he's called me to be. Own your story and realize that God's not done writing it. And the greatest chapters in this book are still to be written. But you've got to be able to walk away from all the old stuff that identified you, and be able to allow God to rework your story, edit it, make the changes, and maybe even give you a new identity. It took me a long time. It really did. But I can tell you, and I say this absolutely without hesitation, I've never been so free. I've never been so happy. I don't have to be anybody else. I don't have to live my life trying to please everybody else. I can be me. And that's enough. As long as everything I do with me honors God and honors the people that I love.